There comes a moment in every man's life when silence speaks louder than charm, when your presence stops chasing and starts haunting, when the man she once overlooked begins to live in her mind, not because he begged, not because he proved, but because he disappeared and became undeniable. This isn't about playing games. It's not about making her jealous or acting like you don't care. It's about evolving, becoming so rooted in your purpose, so calm in your power, that your absence shakes her more than your attention ever did. You see, women don't worry about the man who always texts back. They don't worry about the man who's too available, too forgiving, too easy to reach. They worry when they feel a shift, when the man who once waited no longer waits, when the man who once broke now builds in silence. That's when her heartbeat starts matching your mystery. This isn't revenge. This is respect. And respect is born the moment a man chooses his value over his validation. When he no longer shows up just to be seen, he vanishes to be remembered. If you've ever felt overlooked, misunderstood, or replaced, this video is your turning point. Stay with me, and I'll show you what truly makes her mind race, and why it's not what you think. Watch this video till the end, like, subscribe, and step into the version of you she'll never forget. There was a time when your presence felt like a gift, a steady warmth, a constant yes, a quiet loyalty that waited longer than it should have. You were always there, in the replies, in the room, in the effort, and she got used to that, not because she was cruel, but because she assumed it would never change, that no matter how little she poured back in, you would keep showing up full. But then something in you broke, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. You started to see what your presence cost you. Every time you explained yourself, every time you stayed when you felt ignored, every time you hoped she'd notice what you gave, it chipped away at something sacred inside you. Your peace, your power, and so you left not with fireworks, not with rage, but with silence. You didn't slam the door. You didn't scream your worth. You just stopped trying, and that, more than any argument, echoed. Because people don't fear noise. They fear the sudden quiet after the music stops. They fear the weight of a space that once held comfort, now holding nothing. Your absence became its own kind of presence, louder than your words, more vivid than your effort. It filled the room with questions she didn't ask when you were right there giving answers. Now she wonders where you went, what you're thinking, if you've moved on, not because you told her, but because you didn't. That silence, it's not punishment, it's proof that you're not the same man who needed to be needed, proof that you've risen above the craving for closure or validation. Proof that you now understand your value, not by how much you give, but by how little you tolerate. And here's what hits the hardest. She doesn't miss your attention. She misses the way it made her feel safe. She doesn't miss your texts. She misses knowing she mattered. She doesn't miss the conversations. She misses the connection that always came without question. This is the power of your absence. It's not loud. It's not vengeful. It simply reveals what was once taken for granted. And sometimes it's the only thing strong enough to make someone finally see what they couldn't when you were standing right in front of them. You walked away quietly, but now you live in the silence she can't ignore. There's a certain exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard. It comes from trying to be understood by someone who already made up their mind. You know that feeling. You sit across from them, searching for the right words, trying to explain your heart, your choices, your boundaries, and all you get back is a wall. Not a question, not curiosity, just silence, dismissal, or worse, judgment dressed up as concern. And after a while, it starts to eat at you. Not just because they don't understand you, but because you start to question yourself. You wonder if maybe you're too sensitive. Too much, not enough. You start editing yourself to avoid conflict. You shrink to keep the peace, and slowly your truth gets diluted by your need to be accepted. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. If someone doesn't want to understand you, no amount of explaining will ever be enough. You're not here to prove your heart to people who only see your mistakes. You're not alive to convince someone of your worth every time you choose peace over performance. Your life is not a courtroom, and you don't owe a defense to people who never cared to know the whole story. There's power in saying less, in letting people misunderstand you, in choosing your sanity over their approval. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop handing them the weapon they use to doubt you. You stop feeding the cycle of maybe, if I just say it differently, they'll finally hear me. No, they heard you, they just didn't care to listen. You free yourself the moment you realize your truth doesn't need permission to exist, because the people who truly care, they don't wait for the perfect explanation. They feel you. They see your intentions even when your words fall short, and they never make you beg for space to be human. So stop over-explaining. Stop rehearsing your worth for an audience that's already tuned out. Let your silence speak for you. Let your boundaries do the talking, and walk away knowing that the right people won't need subtitles to understand your soul. When you stop justifying who you are, you finally make room for who you're becoming. There's a certain kind of pain that teaches you to disappear, not out of fear, but out of necessity. You stop announcing your every move. You stop explaining your every feeling, not because you've given up, but because you've finally understood that not everything sacred deserves to be seen. When you're broken, people gather around with curiosity, sometimes even sympathy. But when you start to rebuild, when you rise quietly, without fanfare, that's when you become powerful. Because there's something terrifying about a person who no longer needs to be understood. Someone who no longer performs their healing for others to validate. You see, people feel safe when they can read you, when they can predict your patterns, your pain, your next step. But once you become unreadable, once you grow in places they don't have access to, that's when they feel the shift. That's when they begin to wonder, not knowing where you are emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It unsettles them. And that silence, it forces them to look at their own noise. You're not being cold. You're being careful. You're learning the power of private growth, the strength of rebuilding without applause, the depth of evolving in a space where no one gets to interfere, interrupt, or interpret your journey. There's something sacred about becoming unreadable, about living in such alignment with yourself that the outside world no longer gets a script. You start to move differently, speak less, observe more, and without realizing it, you become the storm they never saw coming, not because you were hiding, but because you were healing. Let them wonder where you went. Let them guess who you're becoming. That distance you've created, it's not isolation. It's transformation. It's the quiet foundation of someone who no longer builds for show, but for strength. Because real growth doesn't need an audience. It just needs time, truth, and silence. So protect your process. Keep your next move to yourself. Let them feel the absence of the version of you they once knew. And when you return, don't explain the silence. Let your presence tell the story they were never meant to read. Sometimes the hardest boundary you'll ever set is the one that doesn't come with an explanation. You just pull back, not to hurt them, not to make a statement, but because staying close started to feel like self-betrayal. You loved them, you cared deeply, you gave what you could, maybe more than you should, and still something inside you began to ache. Not because of what they did, always, but because of what you kept allowing. The tiny dismissals, the lack of reciprocity, the way your presence became expected instead of appreciated. You start realizing that love without respect is slow erosion. That access without effort drains the soul, and so, without drama, without fireworks, you begin to step back. And that distance, it isn't a punishment, it's a boundary, a quiet line drawn not in anger, but in grief. Because you didn't want it to come to this. You wanted to stay, you wanted to be close. But staying close to someone who keeps touching your wounds without noticing they're bleeding, that's not love. That's self-neglect. People might call it cold. They might say you've changed, but they don't see the sleepless nights you spent wondering what more you could have done. They don't feel the weight you carried trying to hold it all together while slowly falling apart. Emotional distance isn't cruelty. It's the final act of self-respect. It means you've stopped hoping for something they never gave. It means you've stopped sacrificing your peace just to keep the connection alive. And most importantly, it means you're choosing healing over habit. You don't owe anyone your constant closeness, especially not when it comes at the cost of your mental clarity, especially not when your presence became something they stopped valuing. So take the space, let the silence breathe, give yourself permission to step out of the emotional chaos and return to your own center. Because when you protect your heart with distance, you're not building a wall, you're building a gate, one that only opens for those who truly see you. Let them feel the absence. Let them wonder why the energy shifted. And if they ever ask, tell them the truth. Closeness without care is what created the distance. You just finally had the courage to honor it. You weren't always like this. There was a time you walked with a quiet certainty, a time when your presence held weight, not because you demanded attention, but because you didn't need it. Somewhere along the way, though, you softened too much, you gave too much room, you compromised parts of yourself you should have protected, and in trying to be kind, understanding, patient, you lost your edge. You started apologizing for having standards. You stayed when your instincts told you to leave. You bit your tongue just to keep peace with someone who never cared if you were at war with yourself. And maybe at first it felt noble, like you were doing the right thing, but eventually the cost becomes clear. They stop respecting you. Not because you're weak, but because you gave away the very tension that made you strong. The man who bends too far to be liked becomes forgettable. The man who always says yes becomes invisible. It's time to stop performing softness and start remembering your strength. Your masculine edge isn't aggression, it's not control, it's clarity, it's the firmness to say no without guilt, the boldness to walk away without pleading, the stillness to hold your ground even when everything around you demands you shrink. And yes, people might push back. They've grown used to the version of you that sacrificed, that tolerated, that waited around hoping to be chosen. But that version of you wasn't whole. He was exhausted. He was silently resenting the fact that kindness kept being mistaken for weakness. Reclaiming your edge means stepping back into your power without apology. It means making decisions from strength, not fear of losing someone. It means being less available, more intentional, and completely unwilling to betray your own soul, just to be accepted. You are not cold, you are not cruel, you are clear, and the clearer you become, the more people will have to meet you where you are, or fall away trying. That edge you buried under politeness, patience, and fear of being misunderstood. Dig it up, sharpen it, and carry it with pride. Because the man who stands firm in who he is, that man is never ignored. It's easy to give attention. A few texts, a compliment here and there, showing up when it's convenient. Attention is cheap, and people get used to it fast. But stability, that's something else entirely. That's what makes someone feel anchored, safe, seen in a way that doesn't come and go with mood or desire. And when you pull that kind of energy away, that's when she starts to feel it. You were steady, consistent. You didn't play games. You offered presence when others gave performance. And maybe she didn't notice it at first. Maybe she mistook that calm for something dull, thought your reliability meant she had options. But now, as you step back, she doesn't miss the attention, she misses the feeling of being grounded. Because here's what most men don't realize. Women don't chase noise. They chase what made them feel safe. And when that safety disappears not through words, but through energy, it leaves a hole they don't know how to fill. You're not withholding to be manipulative. You're stepping back because you finally see the difference between being wanted and being used. You realize that emotional stability should never be handed out to someone who only values the thrill of the moment. You were the calm in her storm, and she didn't even realize the weather changed because of you. Now she feels it, not because you're gone, but because what you gave, no one else can replicate. Not the random guy texting her compliments, not the attention seekers on social media, because none of them made her feel centered. None of them held the ground the way you did. Let her sit with the absence of your steadiness. Let her feel the difference between attention and presence, between flattery and safety. If she's ever going to chase you, let it be not for how much you once gave, but for how much she lost when you stopped. You were never just nice. You were the ground she stood on, and now that it's gone, she finally sees how high she was standing.